Hey everybody, welcome back. To Your Eternity Episode 2 dropped earlier this week, which can only mean one thing. It's time to point out the differences between the anime and manga, give our impressions, and wrap all of that up into a nice, summary-fueled, digestible narrative. If we succeed, go ahead and hit that like button. With that out of the way, let's get down to business and take a look at Episode 2 of To Your Eternity. The shapeshifter continues his endless journey forward. Unlike the boy, our shapeshifter has not prepared and has no means of securing food. Not that he needs it. Our mysterious narrator talks us through a series of deaths suffered along the way, explaining that death is merely a temporary state of being for our immortal friend here. The immortal starves twice, endures 3 fatal falls, and rests under 1 rock slide. Oima's manga covers this journey with odd angles, extreme close-ups, and frequently distant, high-angle shots. The latter differs most, maintaining the immortal evenly, center frame, and merging what were multiple panels into jump cuts that close in on the subject. It's here that the narrator establishes a key theme of the series, being growth. Every death is a lesson. What it is, how to fix it, always improving itself with every lesson the immortal learns. Then, upon the 7th death at the hands of this monstrous bear riddled with figurative thorns, we get a brilliant shot of the immortal's blood. This merges multiple panels and places us in the immortal's upended point of view, ushering us into our first look at the show's opening credits. Porifera thinks that it's worth mentioning that you should consider skipping the opening song. Not every story is as straightforward as episode 1, and amidst the barrage of images, he worries it may create expectations that will limit your imagination of what's possible in this series, as the series evolves. He then proceeded to write a bunch of spoilers into the script that I had to replace with this sentence. As someone experiencing the series solely through the anime, I will not let my fellow viewer be exposed to such imagination-limiting expectation. No! I'm not shouting out the corpse pit! The episode proper opens on a young girl named March, role-playing motherhood. She watches as another girl gets proclaimed as an adult, putting a flower in her hair. March's gaze is interrupted by her friend Perona, who delights in March's happiness and is more than happy to join in on the role-playing. It comforts her. We get a quick transitional shot of the Ninana lakeside, again, differing from the source as it's a level shot, not an overhead. While this gives us a sense of the woods at dusk, the manga gives us a sense of a downtown center. Miscellaneous added details like extra bales of hay are also cut from the anime interpretation of the Ninana village. So long as we have raised log and thatchery-topped houses along an unconquerable rocky mountainside deep in the forest, it's pretty well the same vibe. There are little details cut like structural ropes everywhere and stockpiles of hay. Porifera wants to shout out the Ainu here as a possible inspiration for the architecture choices. So, there you go, Ainu. Got yourself a YouTube tag. The next scene, with March having a conversation with her parents, gives us our first bits of actual cut content, with the parents simply commenting that they can't imagine March growing up. It's less of an ominous thing, and more so a fondness of her childlike wonder. After an additional town view to set the scene, we watch, with bated breath, the badass Perona. There are 3 differences in Adaption. The build-up in manga form begins with her arriving, accepting the heaviest bow they have, all while the others flock to see her shooting again. It feels a tad more adversarial, and implies that there's a change in her behavior that has Perona practicing again. Oh, also in the manga, the bird doesn't exit the scene, which Porifera posits could make one think that she didn't want to disturb it. Yes, he's one of those. Lastly, the anime cuts a conversation where March tries to interrupt her practice, but Perona brushes her off, and we exit, continuing with March playing alone. The rearrangements to this scene at the expense of the townsfolk looking a little too encouraging isn't too much to fret over, as we are about to reach the true meat of the episode. March hears an alert she doesn't recognize as Perona suddenly appears, bringing the young girl with her into the woods. Before they get too far though, they are stopped by Hayase, a warrior of the Yanomi. The anime flexes its advantages with a wonderful addition of her narrowing eyes. Hayase tells March and Perona to turn back, and we get to pause with the tense shot of Perona gripping March's hand as she weighs her options. We cut to a tapestry depicting a mysterious spiky figure that we might be able to recognize, and a Ninana girl. This is followed by a tighter shot of the crowd, combining multiple panels into a single panning shot. Hayase explains the Yonomi help the villages of the Ninana carry out a sacrificial pilgrimage that targets one young ink-faced lass every so often. We'll learn more about this down the line, but for now, let's just accept that this is how Hayase handles things, using traditions to strategic benefit. The scene is set with an ominous, chill beat with a piano and a trumpet. Ninana feels very jazzy and laid back, yet foreboding, compared to the warm whimsy we got in the north, beyond the mountains. Back in the scene though, an old sagely woman appears and begins inspecting the few children of the village, and we get the real focus of the scene. Who knows what the woman is looking for, but March brims with humor and energy while being inspected. March audibly laughing at nose hairs is a particularly great touch. While March is escorted home along a downgraded pathway and the township thanks her and her family, we're apparently gonna take the time here to shout out sound director Takeshi Takadera. While a noteworthy credit of his comes from Fooly Cooly as sound manager, he has also been a sound director on many series such as Cardfight Vanguard, Yuru Camp, and Yowamushi Pedal. You really gotta appreciate how he's overlooking the cohesiveness between the casted voice actors and the OST and sound effects. March's selection scene, as well as her added cartoony flourishes pair well with the slower, more ominous, and, for lack of a better term, jazzy ambiance of the Ninana. It's great stuff and helps make the anime experience fulfilling and tonally vibrant. The anime skips structural details of the inside of March's house while keeping the same perspective, as her parents suddenly break down into tears and apologies. Nothing's private with Hayase on guard, and she makes sure March knows exactly what's going on. No flowery language or fluff. Hayase then separates March's father from his daughter, and the anime delivers a cold example of Hayase doing something nice. No men are to be alone with her, as if to safeguard March from any assault that may forfeit her as a candidate for sacrifice. This definitely feels more like a matter of protocol than a direct warning to the father. In manga, Hayase is a tad more formal, verbose, and apologetic, but it's still cold, and the implications are chilling. The anime cuts the father reacting as if he should refuse March as an offering, likely for brevity, as we'll see that internal conflict later. The anime jumps to Hayase whipping out a schedule and detailing the pilgrimage as elaborated through special stills. The third of which has a changed perspective, becoming a more center frame shot now that it's not a panel crammed to be in the bottom right hand corner of a page. It now prominently features Hayase. March will interrupt this exposition as she needs to clear up what this means for her dream of being a grown-up mama someday. The manga shows this exposition after March's outburst, not before, and the rearrangement doesn't lose much for making Hayase seem more detached and less playful, while also showing the father to be more of a pushover. March is conveyed perfectly, right down to cutting shots as she speaks with an open mouth. Hayase doesn't smile here as she does in manga form, and the anime flexes its extra frames once again as we see her eyes narrow. While March has a deserved tantrum, we cut to the sad township outside and marvel at the anime-only window added to March's house. Instead of ripples along the lakeside, we reuse a shot of Ninana houses as the townspeople deliver offerings. We're no longer transitioning with Hayase's exposition, but are carried forward with a deep, synthetic bass that holds our mixed feelings after March's father asks her to behave and die. A quick shout out to the toy rocking horse. Glad you made it, buddy. Lala, another child in the village, offers March some sort of flower. The anime stages this scene inside and not outside, while March is visibly overburdened carrying offerings. The empathy and confusion is real. March accepts it, mirroring the grace of Lee, the young woman March saw at the beginning of the episode. Despite the situation, we get to see March trying to still be a good example as the eldest of the 3 children, as she tries to put Lala's mind at ease. After that, we cut to March trying to reason with the ever-vigilant Hayase. We transition along a flowing river serenaded in birdsong, and not the manga's quick cloudscape. Hayase's rebuttals are cold, suggesting just how many times she's gone through these motions. We get to see Hayase smile as she establishes the power she wields over March, which is what Porifera was looking for during the lead up to March's tantrum not long ago. We get a cold cut to March's sister, and an impactful shot of March crying as she tries to spend her last night at home. The next dewy morning, we're with March in a properly masoned town center as the journey begins. March stands out as the only one with a smile on her face as she says goodbye to the rest of the village. We then get a nice back and forth shot as March realizes Perona is the only one in the village not saying goodbye. The vast forest we oversee lacks the ugly, unclimbable cliff faces that the manga depicts. Hayase praises March's obedience before telling of a Yonomi legend that says freedom awaits people after death. This directly relates to the end of the last episode, as we saw the boy finally free to join his people and find others, maybe even fruit. With an eagle in view, March latches onto the vibe of freedom and slowly moves to step off the cart. Then, as if on cue, an arrow spirals through the air, head over tail, and smacks Hayase in the face as March bolts down a far more forgiving path than the thick, toppled, rocky brush of the manga. Porifera is convinced there's some parallels being drawn here between Perona's archery and the eagle to the target practice with the bird on the target earlier. But, just like with the Ainu, we don't have much else to say here other than we wanted to say it. Also, it's a joy to see anime-only reactors immediately catch on to Perona's lousy shot. Hayase gets a bit more coverage here as Perona runs away, while in the next scene we get a bit less perspective than the manga had. We don't see Hayase's hand, which would detail the distance March has made during her getaway. Added are bits of Hayase getting up and March sliding down a slope before tripping. Takadera's soundscape, as well as the added momentum of seeing March slide on her head, maintain comedy in a scene that could have been seen as sad or depressing with the wrong direction. March lands in a big puddle with little time to spare and removes her child signaling face paint by her own damn self, after admonishing herself for not sticking to her father's wishes. The anime begins mimicking the manga frame for frame, as we finally reunite with a familiar face? March takes a moment to catch her breath, before realizing she's leaning on an eyeball. As the eyeball gets sucked out of her hand, we get my favorite clip in the whole anime so far. With some badass shots of our protagonist's mangled corpse, us anime-only viewers are treated to extra angles of his limbs and torso coming together, with a beautiful, portentous score setting the tone of his arrival into this plot. The Yonomi goons chasing March leave upon seeing the immortal in its early stages of injury, and while the manga keeps them in sight as March reacts, the anime gets rid of them quite quickly and frames March in close-ups. The immortal finishes his regeneration before ushering us to commercial. The grand depiction of the untamed Nanana wilds are less emphasized in the anime, as the immortal and March exit the swampy puddle. We cut to Hayase apprehending Perona and monologuing. The anime retains Hayase's facelessness in these panels while changing the visual composition to better suit the anime frame. Hayase shows off her smile some more as if she's almost entertained by Perona's attempt. She then points out that she plans on using the Nanana people's own beliefs to vilify Perona's rescue attempt. She does so while holding the floral hairpin March received from Lala. Before Hayase can scheme further or charge recklessly to avoid humiliating her military record, her goons have returned and inform her that they've seen a monster. Now we settle into the final setting of the episode. Marchin the Immortal, often shortened to Emo or Fushi. For now, we'll be using Fushi going forward, until the dub clarifies his name in the future. The anime glosses over some lines while March unsuccessfully tries to converse with Fushi. She goes on several tangents and asks a lot of questions, which aren't as important as Fushi's silence or the tangent of March saying immortal or... We then get a memorable scene as March helps Fushi accomplish something the old owner of his body never could: eating fruit. Fushi, of course, eats as he learned to as a dog, while scored with a light and playful melody. The small touches shine brightly here, as these antics will carry us all the way to the end of this episode. The anticipatory pause and release of the fruit as March almost loses a hand to Fushi's animal instincts is framed perfectly here. She tries to teach him, like the boy did, but Fushi ain't having none of that. Oima's manga shows great composition in these scenes, as Fushi dismissively bats the fruit to itself on another panel. Notice the triangle shape hidden among the commotion, the fruit escaping the panel into Fushi's mouth. The anime tries to bridge this gap in mediums with breathless eating, vocal delivery, a depth to the fruit smacking sound that gets lighter each time, and the quickness and weight of Fushi throwing itself to eat on all fours. The show then tries to tug at our empathy strings for March once again, as she futilely attempts to pick fruit for herself. However, Fushi relentlessly attacks the fruit from her hands as soon as she returns to the ground. She breaks down into tears of hunger and frustration before climbing one more time and angrily throwing a fruit at Fushi. This continues as she begins to admire Fushi's animalistic traits. Then, suddenly, he stops. Fushi's eyes changing from Joan's yellow to the boy's pink is an anime-only addition. The boy's dream of eating fruit has finally been fulfilled. Empathetic March gets to play mother once again, but this time it's not much of a game. Fushi's eyes return yellow while it eats out of March's hand and remain that way for the rest of the episode. I love the constant drool, and that our main character is a messy infant being taught to speak and survive by a child. Also dog-like is how Fushi shakes its chin away from March's hand. He winds up curling into a ball on the ground and goes to sleep, giving March the freedom to finally have her own fruit. March decides to take a nap too, and while the manga is vague about area during her nightmare, we can see that her family is waiting with open arms in the downtown circle. After some fantastic imagery of Lisa and Lala being offered to the deity Oniguma in March's place, we get that vague, dreamlike imagery of Perona and the townspeople coming to cast judgment, affirming that March does not realize that Perona helped her escape. Lee's there too. This dream establishes that it's not just the burden of the lives of others weighing on March, but also living up to what the other adults endure. Perhaps that's not the right way to word it, but we'll get to chat more about this very dream next time. When March awakens, we get extended shots of her crying and leaving. Instead of further shots emphasizing the forest at a distance or the sky, we see the dewy dawn illuminate the trees above Fushi as it wakes. Once it discovers something's amiss, then we get the further forest shot implying a passage of time, but not by much as it tracks March down, and the little one can't seem to overcome the funk of her situation. Keeping the whistling toss sound and gentle score provides levity to what otherwise would be a downer scene, and we end on March self-actualizing her relationship to Fushi. Once again, a dream come true. Sorta. Needless to say, I personally hate that line as our episode outro. Episode 2 covers 70 pages with few panels skipped and dialogue streamlined. The pages cover all of Chapter 2 and a little over 2/3 of Chapter 3. The ending theme, Mediator, is by Masashi Hamauzu, who some may recognize for his work on composing for Final Fantasy XIII. He's moved on to his own studio now, Mono Music. Between him and Utada Hikaru, I'm surprised. Just surprised and delighted. Porifera has informed me that the ending also contains clips of people and places that we may or may not have seen yet. I personally think it's just a bunch of pretty shapes and colors. And that's gonna do it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed, and thank you so much for watching. These videos are written by both myself and my roommate review colleague Porifera. If you watch this and you didn't find the sound of my voice annoying or grating in any way, you might enjoy my content over on my gaming channel, so go and check that out. Link in the description below. Also, Porifera has a lot more manga content in the works, and that's all going to be uploaded right here on the roommate review, so be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of it. But until then, I'll catch y'all next time. Ciao for now.